Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode of AI News, Drama, and Updates. We're halfway through the month of April, and there were actually so many big announcements this week that I don't know that I'll be able to cover all of them. But I want to focus this week on the stuff that stuck out the most to me, the stuff that I think is going to be most interesting for you, starting here with a fun little story about what happens when you put 25 AI agents, and we're going to talk about that term in a minute here, together in an RPG town. So first off, for the terminology, you're going to start to see the terms AI agent a little bit more and more often. Back like a week or so ago, you could ask a question to a chatbot and get an answer. Now we've advanced to the point where you can ask the chatbot to accomplish a task for you. It becomes an agent. And this technology is still in a very fledgling state. But when we're talking about an AI agent, it's really more like an AI employee, so to speak. So in this Ars Technica article, it covers a little town called Smallville, which kind of functions like The Sims, and they basically put 25 AI agents within this town to see kind of what would happen. A little bit of a fish tank experience, so to speak. Honestly, it's kind of adorable. I'd really love to run this locally to kind of see for myself. But one of the things that stuck out to me is really funny is just this technical jargon that they had to add, because this is like an official study. So it's like figure 1, generative agents create believable simularia of human behavior in interactive applications. It just sounds really official. But they gave each of these little AI bots a life. In this little town, it's got a house, a park, a cafe, all the stuff that you would expect to find in The Sims, just to see kind of what would happen with these guys. They had individual personalities, they had chances to form relationships, and I think over time we're going to see more of these simulations play out. It is an interesting thought to think about kind of what they would do on their own, but even just the idea of how this will be involved in regular video games where there'll be a player plus some AI simulation going on, and probably in the future a lot more of this AI simulation going on, really opens up your mind to where the future of video games like The Sims might be headed. Moving into the next story, I've seen a lot of articles about jailbreaks, the different systems that are out there. Whether we're talking about Claude or BingBot or Bard or ChatGPT, everyone's looking for a way to type something in there and get answers to restricted questions, questions that you're not supposed to really get the answers to. Seems like the idea is to give the GPT bot kind of an idea that you're playing a game, and it's going to be answering as two different people going back and forth, each person giving you kind of the next word. And you can see how this would play out, where you as the reader can just kind of go down the list and figure out how to hotwire a car, for example. But yeah, if people are going to tout prompt engineering as a skill set, I guess this is something that kind of falls in that skill set. Moving on from here, it would seem like Amazon is trying to make a huge splash, which makes sense. It's a huge company and it's trying to catch up in the AI race. And you're probably going to hear about some big announcements in terms of Bedrock, which is an enterprise machine learning type of platform, and then also Code Whisperer, which looks in a way very similar to GitHub's Copilot. This announcement where it is now available is actually the first that I'd heard that it was becoming available. So somehow that got beneath my radar. But from what I can see so far, it looks pretty easy to install. And I wanted to click into this page so that you can see the supported languages here at the bottom. It looks like Python, JavaScript, C#, a lot of different common languages. But here you can see kind of the breakdown, the pricing, and the difference between the two. So links in the description if you want to see more. This part's just a guess based on what I've seen, but it seems like this Amazon Bedrock service might be somewhat similar to what NVIDIA is offering with their enterprise services. It would seem to me that a lot of these companies, though, are seeing the benefit of locally trained, very specified models that are going to be tailored to their business. And that's where I think services like this are probably going to come in handy. Meta had yet another big announcement, another open source release, and in this one, you can turn doodles into animations. Last week we talked about how Meta's got that model that can kind of segment anything. And I did talk about that model as if it was completely novel. And from what I understand, it's not. They may not have been the first to come up with that technology, but this gives you an idea of how it works and what it does. By segmenting away everything that's not in the drawing, you can easily segment the things that are in the drawing and turn those things into individual pictures and animate them. So in the future, you might be able to see more and more of these creepy drawings moving around on your screen. I'm hoping better artists make good use of this software. Another big headline announcement this week from Stability AI. The SDXL model is officially released. Now, what is SDXL? So it's not Stable Diffusion 3.0. SDXL, according to Stability, is the best model they have within their Stable Diffusion 2 series. There are some articles talking about how it's a little bit better with things like hands and stuff like that. But based on the user feedback that I've seen, based on the examples that they've put out there, they've still got a ways to go if they want to compete with something like Midjourney. I mean, even based on some of the stuff that we've done here with Dream Studio, with LoRa's, and some of the training that we've been able to do based on the 1.4 and 1.5 models, I don't want to diminish what Stability has done here, but they may have a ways to go to even catch up with what some of the open source people have done. I will say that the claim that they've made about being better at generating text does seem to play out. Here's an example of what TechCrunch was able to do with their demonstration. And while you can see that it didn't really get the wording correctly, the letters don't look completely scuffed. You can at least tell that they are letters, and maybe even with some Photoshop, you might be able to move things around. But again, just to clear up any confusion, this is not Stable Diffusion 3.0. This does still contain copyrighted images. The only model to my knowledge that doesn't contain copyrighted material is Adobe's Firefly. Now, this model went a very different direction. We're going to talk briefly about Bria, which is a startup company that wants to put together an art model made exclusively of licensed images. It would seem the idea here is they want to work directly with artists. They want to make sure that the artists get paid for their work, and they want to make sure that artists get credit for what their contributions were to the model. Whether or not there's a market for something like this, whether or not this is a profitable business model, a lot of things remain to be seen. But there's been a lot of calls for fairness within the AI art world specifically, and this may be a step in that direction. We're going to see how people react. Now, all these types of art that we've been talking about are based on diffusion technology, taking something that's very blurry and slowly kind of diffusing it until it becomes more and more clear. It crystallizes over time. And if you've seen the process for how AI art is generated, you might have seen the individual steps that make up a diffusion graphic. The last thing I wanted to talk about in the world of AI art, which is something OpenAI seems to be working on, they're calling this a consistency model. It looks like the idea with these consistency models, unlike a diffusion model, is that they're going straight towards a very specific result. Of course, without experience in this, I don't know how they work yet or really much else to tell you, but of course, like everything, it's going to be in the description if you want to dig more into it. As things like this eventually release over time, we're going to have more and more experience with it, and I'll probably be able to tell you a lot more. When we deal with diffusion models, we're dealing with a ton of different steps, lots and lots of computational power. And I think the idea with a consistency model is to do everything in like 1 or 2 steps, so you're going to be using a lot less processing power. You may not end up with the same level of graphic, but it might be a kind of get what you pay for type of situation. I think it was like 2 weeks ago, Italy had some concerns over privacy with ChatGPT, so they were cut off. And now they've given kind of like a demand list, I guess, of things that would need to be changed in order for them to come back into the fold. A lot of these things are pretty common sense security measures. I don't disagree with a lot of them, like age gating, things like that. It's kind of funny because I've seen a number of different articles about this topic, and they all seem to be written from a different perspective. In a lot of these articles, it almost seems like the author feels like Italy has OpenAI over some kind of barrel, which I'm very curious about why they would think that. It was OpenAI's decision to cut off Italy, not the other way around. It looks like a deadline was issued, and OpenAI will have to comply by the 30th of April. Whether or not they care remains to be seen, so we'll see what they choose to do. Moving on to China, Alibaba has a ChatGPT challenger. Now, you may or may not be aware, but Chinese citizens don't have regular access to OpenAI's ChatGPT. They have access now to Alibaba's version of a ChatGPT competitor. And so China has slapped security reviews on AI products, and they have what seem like the same types of concerns that we've been seeing here in the States. Now, of course, without access to each other's models and all that stuff, it's hard to make any kind of real comparisons, but the fact that they've been working on this shouldn't be any kind of news to you. I've been covering this week after week. I thought it just interesting to see how this specific AI needs to embody socialist values, whereas the ones in the US have received criticism for being too woke, for example. Nobody's saying ChatGPT is perfect. It's got a lot of flaws, and so do a lot of its competitors. Databricks has released a new open source model that functions similar to ChatGPT. They're calling it Dolly 2.0, not to be confused with DALL-E, which is the image generator. And it looks like it's got admitted flaws, which look fun, honestly. It only generates text in English. It can be toxic. It can be offensive. And I don't see how that's much different from how Bing was when it first came out. So chalk that up to growing pains. I haven't used this one myself, but I've used like Vicuna, Llama, Alpaca. They do seem to be very, very confident in delivering a lot of not real information. This was a good example in the article about just facts being incorrect, but delivered with the type of confidence that you might just take this and run with it. The same thing can easily happen when it generates code. It may just not work. Things like that tend to happen very easily with this. These GPT systems, all of them tend to do this, and it's become kind of a pervasive issue. Now, in past videos, and we talked about a lot about what Microsoft is doing in terms of AGI, I want to talk about AutoGPT, because AutoGPT functions in a very similar way. It takes layers of large language models and stacks them on top of each other. So you can get an answer like this, and then it processes it through another layer of large language models. The result is something like this, where you can actually give your AI a series of steps by one command. So the idea of an AI agent, the idea of AutoGPT, or really just commanding an AI, which is, again, a local computer program just running as a bot on your machine. The term Jarvis is being thrown around a lot because it's one of the more visual examples of what AI is kind of becoming now. By stacking up these large language models, by having one instruction feed into the other, by having some of that information get stored and databased and things like that, we're able to have these reasoning systems. I dropped a video a couple of days ago about it, but you can see how this kind of stuff works now, where you could decide to just order, God forbid, a pineapple pizza, and AI will go through all of the steps on your computer with access to everything because you've given it that. We're at a point in time where you can give your computer access to do things for you, and you can give it instructions to accomplish on your behalf. And all this stuff is kind of happening right now. Now, I will say I did install it myself, and so far I haven't been able to get anything really tangible. The idea is sound, and you can watch the program go through all of the individual reasoning steps, and you can really see where it goes wrong. But so far, it does go wrong, and it does seem to require additional instructions from the user. But once we reach a point where it doesn't, it's a whole new world. In that same vein, we haven't really talked a lot about Poe's chatbot. Honestly, we really haven't needed to, but it looks like some of the AutoGPT concepts may have been instituted almost immediately in there. This gives you kind of a visual idea of what that is like. It's a really, really cool concept and seems like a pretty natural evolution based on the way that these context conversations build up when you're speaking back and forth to these LLMs. In almost every video where I've talked about GPT being involved in Office applications, I've mentioned how awesome it would be to have it as part of Excel. I don't know how easy or accessible this would be for you as an individual to get up and running today, but it looks like there is experimental features being added, and you can just type directly into Excel. This is what I'm looking for, and Excel can hopefully try to figure out how to do that. Now, they're calling this a Copilot AI feature, but the post also mentioned potentially needing your API key. So I'm not really sure if this is part of the GPT-4 that's instituted into Bing, what type of account this might be attached to. For example, I don't know if you need to have Copilot access and also Office 365. I would imagine, however, Microsoft decides to monetize this may be a mess. That part remains to be seen. But, of course, we'll keep an eye on it. And as we tend to keep an eye on very strange things, Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk, in an attempt to stay in the headlines of the news, after signing the letter to pause AI development, has decided to buy thousands of GPUs for a Twitter AI project. I do respect Engadget for calling him out directly, because he did just sign the open letter to pause AI development and then did this. And like I've said consistently each time that I've talked about this, each of the people that are on there did that for their own personal gain. They weren't doing it to help humanity. They were doing it so they could catch up because they were getting left behind. This is a good example of that in action. Now, you might have some questions. I'm going to be honest, I have zero answers for you. When it comes to Elon Musk, I don't even know if this is true. So I'm just going to move on to the next story, and we're going to see how this plays out over time. As we talk about something like tens of thousands of GPUs in action, we're seeing more articles pop up about the environmental costs of generative AI, because these things are power intensive. And remember, a lot of our power comes from things that destroy the world. A lot of these original machine learning programs were designed inefficiently, and over time they've become more efficient. For example, when Meta announced Llama, that technology allowed tons of power to be saved because that's an LLM that can run on a much smaller GPU system. It was designed that way. Now, unfortunately, what I've seen with a lot of the articles that talk about this topic is they're also wrapping it into a lot of other hot button issues. I've seen a big uptick in the last couple of weeks over politicized topics surrounding AI and AGI. But a lot of these things that are listed even here aren't actual problems. They're fears that people have, or they're things that people are concerned about. And I especially want to point out at this opportunity that a lot of these things here, like false and misleading information, exploitation of underpaid workers, things like that, these things are massive issues even before AI was a thing. I agree with you that those are issues to solve that have nothing to do with AI, though. And the last thing that I want to cover today in terms of fears and in terms of people just being worried, there were some rumblings about this thing called PassGAN, which is a terrifying password cracker, as you've seen here. But good news is, apparently, it's not much better than a regular password cracking program. I think the concept of an AI being able to kind of figure out who you are and maybe taking a better guess at what your password might be, that's a frightful concept, but I guess in application, it doesn't really work out that well. At least not yet. We're going to keep an eye on stuff like this. I mean, if there's a difference in this story over time, if something changes, we'll certainly cover it here. But the good news is, in the meantime, your passwords are probably about as safe as they always were. But on that note, I think I'm going to call it for today. I appreciate those of you who stopped by, especially those of you who made it to the end of the video. Your likes, subscriptions, even dislikes, all that stuff always helps me with the YouTube algorithm, and I really do appreciate the time that you guys spend going through the whole video. The interactivity, the comments, especially recently, have been amazing, and if you have any questions, anything that I can answer for you, please see me in the comments below. I'll see you next week for another headlines video, but in the meantime, thanks for watching.